Welcome, everyone, to the Let Purple Rain podcast. My name is Joe Arpezi, otherwise known as Purple Rain. I started my CFF work in 2008, and after stepping away for 8 years, I returned in 2024 as Purple Rain. You can find all of my content at letpurplerain.com. You can also follow the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. It'd really help if you can give the new Spotify a 5-star review. It'd help it grow. And the number one place that you can follow me would be on X. You can find me at UW_purple_rain. That is spelled REIGN. It is the best place to keep up to date with everything happening in CFF. And we have some special announcements that we are going to go over this week here. I am hosting the 2025 Battle for the Belt 52-Man League Challenge. And we are coming up here with 2 weeks left in the regular season of that league. The foundation for that league, the way that it is set up, is that we have 4 different divisions of 13 teams. After 9 weeks of a regular season, the top 8 teams of every division will move on to a divisional playoff series. Excuse me. Right now, we are doing best ball scoring. The top 8 teams who score the most points move on to that divisional league playoff series. After 3 weeks of divisional playoffs, we would have 4 division champs. They will all go head to head in the league playoffs to see who is the league champion. And I'm going to be doing some updates on the league. But since we're in like the push for the playoffs here, I'm just going to kind of go over what we have here for the 4 different divisions. And I'm not going to read off every team. Those of you watching on YouTube will be able to see the full standings. And what I have on the screen, I have the top 8 teams that right now are looking like they're in line for the playoffs. And then there's a little break, and I have the 2 teams that are just outside of that bubble. So these are like the teams that we're watching here. And I'm going to start with the Eric Froton division. Right now, Steve from RotoWire is leading that division. And for the very bottom, like the last 2 that are in and the last 2 that are out, we have Brad Everett and Mark Holman that are holding down the 7 and 8 spots. But Garrett Jan Vanderberg and Rex Holstein are fighting to try and get in to make the playoffs in that one. In the Jared Palmgren division, that division is led by Syracuse Sharks with Mr. Jared Palmgren not too far behind him in second place. The 4 teams that are fighting to make the last spots is Katie J 1970, Brian Kruper are the 7 and 8, and then the 9 and 10 spots right now are occupied by Dwight Peebles and Rich Dillon. Rich has got some work cut out for him to try and make it in here, but Dwight is right in the hunt here. And going to my division, the Joe Arpezi division, I'm apologizing because I'm trying to read. Goat Ropers is in first place. I am nipping on his heels in second place. Our last 2 in right now is Caleb Godspeed and Brian Delana. Right behind them, excuse me, let me take a sip of water. Right behind them, with a chance for still being able to try and make the playoffs, is Mark from CFB Depth. It's a great website. You should definitely check that one out. And then Brett Michael is in 10th, but definitely an uphill climb to try and make it into the top 8. And our final division is the John McKechnie division. John McKechnie is leading that one. And our 2 teams that are in the 7 and 8 spots is James Clements and Frank Vasquez. And then our 9 and 10 teams are right on their heels. This is pretty close. This is going to be a close contest here to see who gets those last 2 playoff spots. But the team that's at number 9 is Bacon Fueled from the Fantasy Points team, and Ryan Ralph. So that one's going to be an interesting division to watch here. And we are now at the show where this is the main show that's going to be on YouTube and Spotify. That's where you're going to get my start-sit selections. And then over on letpurplerain.com, that is the exclusive home for the submitted questions show where I'm going to answer your submitted questions. And I advise this to everybody every week. I start a thread on X and on Substack. This is where you can submit your questions to me for me to answer in that show. I will, in the postings, it says, like, please answer one question. And it has some other instructions on there as well. I've been telling people lately, if you have two questions, go ahead and just give me both. If I'm able to fit both in the show, I will do that. So once again, why I mentioned, follow me on X. It's an awesome place to go, and that's another thing that, like, you can submit your questions to me, and I can help you get a lineup, get your best lineup out there. My goal is to help everyone win a fantasy championship this year. And before we dive into things here, I'm going to take another sip of water. And anyone that might be new to the show here, I will go over on the main show 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 3 receivers, 3 tight ends, people that I've identified that I think are worth going over, whether you need to start them or sit them. I will go through, I read several different advanced stats. I go through where I have each player ranked in my player rankings this week. I will let you know how good or bad any advanced stat is. I will say it's really good, average, kind of bad, really bad. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I do a color scheme for that. So dark green is really good, light green, kind of good, black is average, light red, kind of bad, dark red, really bad. I've covered all that. Let's dive into some quarterbacks here. I'm going to start things off with a pretty popular name, one of the top quarterbacks this whole season that people have been hanging on to, and that's Parker Navarro from Ohio. He is taking on Northern Illinois. I have Navarro as my number 65 quarterback this week, and Vegas is projecting Ohio to score 27 points in this game. That 27 points might be the absolute most. As I look at, especially from a passing perspective, guys, this is not a good matchup for Ohio. Everything is kind of bad when it comes to the advanced stats in this one. For a fantasy matchup grade, and this is something that I do. I have a formula I work this out on. Once again, for anybody new, just to do a quick recap of it, what I do is I take the team stats for rush offense, rush defense, pass defense. I apply fantasy points to those team stats. I then re-rank all of these offenses and defenses based on the fantasy points scored or the fantasy points allowed. I then take where the offense and defense match up with these rankings, and I kind of have a formula that will kick out a grade. So, like the better a pass offense is against a pass defense, the higher up it ranks, the lower down that defense ranks, that will create a more positive fantasy matchup grade. And for Parker Navarro here, as we switch back to talking about him, um, this one came out as a D plus fantasy matchup grade for passing. The Northern Illinois pass defense has only given up one passing touchdown per game. They are giving up touchdowns in the red zone only 43.5% of the time, and they are giving up 6.1 yards per pass attempt. As I stated at the beginning, these are all kind of bad matchup advanced stats here for Navarro. Looking at all of the negative, looking at all the red that's on the screen, I have to just sit there and say, Parker Navarro, Ohio, sit 'em. My next quarterback here is CJ Carr from Notre Dame taking on Southern California. I have Carr as my quarterback 19. I think this is the highest I've ever had him ranked all year, and he has been getting better every week. He is looking like a darn good quarterback. Right now, Vegas is calling on Notre Dame to score 34 and a half points. I like anything, I would say anything that starts to hit 30 and above is pretty good to really good. So, getting close to 35 points, I like that quite a bit for Notre Dame. And we know Notre Dame's a good running team, and that's where they do a lot of their scoring. But I still have CJ Carr ranked pretty high. They've actually been improving quite a bit in the passing game, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that the fantasy matchup grade here for the Notre Dame passing game is an A against USC. USC is giving up 2.17 passing touchdowns per game. That's pretty good. They are also giving up 7.8 yards per pass attempt. That is also pretty good. The one thing that's in the negative here for Carr is that USC is only giving up touchdowns in the red zone 46.7% of the time. So that's kind of bad. But everything else I like here with this matchup. The thing I'll say about CJ Carr, like he'll get about 2 touchdowns. That's what he's been doing the last couple weeks. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to get 3. I do think he has a chance with this matchup. But Carr's a guy that if you're going to put him in your lineup, he needs to be your QB2 or maybe a super flex. I don't think he's good enough to be a QB1 unless you're just really needing some help here. So CJ Carr, Notre Dame, I'm going to say start him. And the last quarterback we're going to review today is Colton Joseph from Old Dominion taking on James Madison. I have Colton Joseph at my QB 39 for the week. The projected score for Old Dominion based on Vegas is 22.5 points. Not that good. The only thing that's there's 2 things that are in Joseph's favor, and that's one reason why I kind of have him still in the 30s in my rankings. The first thing is he's been playing pretty good. And, Colton Joseph is a guy, he gets things done on the ground. All the advanced matchups I'm looking at are in the air, just because when he doesn't do well in the air, he's usually in the low to mid 20s for a fantasy score. So I do kind of feel like the passing matchup is the thing that vaults him into the 30 or 40 fantasy point scoring performances. So, he has been performing really well. I always take into account how well has someone been playing over the last 3 weeks when I am doing my player rankings. So I like that about Joseph. And he has an average fantasy matchup grade. Actually, I'm going to say it's right on the edge of below average. It's a C minus. Right on that edge of if it was a D plus, it would be a kind of bad grade, just like we talked about with Navarro. So he's just a teeny bit better than Navarro, but that's about the last of the good things I can say. Like I mentioned, Vegas is only calling on them to score 22.5 points. That's kind of bad. The James Madison defense is only giving up 1 passing touchdown per game. That's kind of bad. They're giving up touchdowns in the red zone 41.7% of the time. That's kind of bad. And they're giving up only 6 yards per pass attempt. That is also kind of bad. So if you haven't noticed the trend here, this is going to be a real simple one. I'm going to say Colton Joseph, Old Dominion, sit him. I'm going to take a sip of water before we jump over to the running backs. There we go. For the running backs here, I am going to start things off with a guy who has been struggling for the last couple of weeks, and that is Quai Ashley, Ball State. I'm including him here because he is taking on Akron. If there's 2 teams, defenses in the MAC that if you've got a guy that's going up against him, pretty much just play them, and that's Akron and Kent State. So with Quai Ashley here, he hasn't been performing very well. There's some good and some average and some not so good about his matchup. But just to sum things up, I really just think they're playing Akron. I can see them running the ball. I can see him having a good day. I think this is going to be a bounce back day for Ashley. So I know I'm kind of tipping my hat on what I think about him here. But I did raise him up to my running back 35. I couldn't put him any higher. It's like I said, it's not all a bunch of great things with the fantasy matchup, and he has not been performing really well the last 3 weeks. But I'm giving it what I'm going to call the Akron bump. Vegas is only calling on Ball State to score 22.5 points. I think Ball State could do better than that this week. The fantasy matchup grade came out to a C plus, which is average, and another advanced stat, which is average here for this matchup, is that Akron is only giving up touchdowns in the red zone 56% of the time. 2 good things for this matchup here. Excuse me. Akron is giving up 1.86 rushing touchdowns per game. That is pretty good. And they are giving up 4.9 yards per carry, which is really good. So if it wasn't obvious enough, I will just go ahead and say it, guys. I'm going to say Quai Ashley, Ball State, start him. Now, just like with the quarterbacks, I have a little bit more of a negative attitude this week for guys that I've picked out. And the next 2 picks aren't ones that I like too much. You can tell for those of you watching on YouTube, and you can see where I have them ranked this week. I have them ranked really, really, really low. I'm going to start off with Tamarian Harden, SMU. He is going up against Clemson. I have him ranked as my running back number 100. That is probably a little bit lower than it should be here. One reason why he's ranked so low is he is not his average fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks. I believe is in the single digits. I don't think he's hit 10 fantasy points as an average over the last 3 weeks. So I need to take another sip of water. I'm going to apologize, guys. Got some bullfrogs today, but he has not been playing very good. And like I said, I put that into effect. I then add that to what I see with this fantasy matchup, and I don't. I think the SMU passing offense is where they're going to get most of their success here against Clemson. Uh, Vegas is calling on SMU to only score 23 points. Not a big fan of that. Other things I'm not a big fan of. There's a D plus fantasy matchup grade that's not very good, and Clemson only gives up one rushing touchdown per game. That's also not very good. Um, what is kind of good? Excuse me, guys. I'm trying to clear up this little bullfrog in my throat, and I am just struggling. One thing, which is kind of good here for Harden, is that Clemson is giving up touchdowns in the red zone 60% of the time. I just think it's going to be the passing game that's going to be able to take advantage of that, not the rushing game. And Clemson is only giving up 3.2 yards per carry, which is an average advanced stat. So for this one, Tamari and Harden, SMU, I'm going to say sit them. Another guy here who I believe his fantasy point average over the last 3 weeks is also in the single digits, is Yasin Williams, Syracuse. He is taking on Pitt. I have him as my running back 95, and Vegas is calling on Syracuse to only score 23 points. This is another situation like Harden, not the best matchup. It is a little bit worse than Harden's, in my opinion. It is a fantasy matchup grade of a D. That's slightly better. Pitt is giving up only one rushing touchdown per game. That's right on par with what Harden's facing. The one thing that I think makes it a little bit worse here, Pitt is only giving up 2.1 yards per carry. That is kind of bad, just like these other stats I've been mentioning. The one thing that is nice is that Pitt is giving up touchdowns in the red zone 66.7% of the time. That's the only good thing Willis has going for him. Um, I just don't think this is a real safe one. Like if you have him, and maybe you're thinking, hey, Pitt doesn't seem that tough on defense, and I have seen some teams score on them. The rushing game, these rushing matchup stats, I just do not like. So Yasin Willis, Syracuse, I say sit him. For the wide receivers, I'm going to be a little more positive in this segment, guys. But I'm going to start off on the negative end here. We already talked about this matchup in the quarterbacks, so I'm going to cover the other end of it, and probably the most reliable guy in the Ohio passing game, that is Chase Hendricks. And this matchup for Northern Illinois, as I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of it. Every single advanced metric, I'm not going to go over each of them again, but every single one is kind of bad. I have Chase Hendrick as my wide receiver 70. He might do the best of all the Ohio offensive guys that are fantasy worthy, but I don't like this matchup, guys. Like even as a flex player, you can find other wide receivers out there if you have room to drop someone to do a spot start. Um, you can find other options. So, uh, making this first one real quick, Chase Hendricks, Ohio. I'm going to say sit him this week. And moving on to my second pick and transitioning to more positive review here, I'm going to talk about Skylar Bell from UConn. He is taking on Boston College, and Vegas is calling on UConn to score 27 points. I have Skylar Bell all the way up in my wide receiver 18 this week. Two really good advanced stats for this matchup. The fantasy matchup grade here for UConn's passing game is an A, and Boston College is giving up touchdowns in the red zone 73.1% of the time. I like both of those things. One other thing that's a pretty good stat here is that Boston College is giving up two passing touchdowns per game. The one average stat in this is that Boston College is giving up 7.1 yards per pass attempt. That's right on the high end of the average range. These are all really nice things here with Boston College. Another thing that I kind of like is that Boston College's offense is sputtering right now, and I'm going to touch on that in the next segment, but like, I don't know how much Boston College is going to be able to sustain some drives. That defense of theirs might get tired being on the field a whole lot. These are all things I think can go in UConn's favor. So I'm a big fan here of this matchup. I'm going to say Skylar Bell, UConn, start 'em. Last guy I'm going to go to. He's not been playing really well over the last 3 weeks. I believe he might have single digits or very low double digit fantasy point average over the last 3 weeks. But that is Shalik Knotts out of Maryland. I'm liking his matchup this week with UCLA. Um, I have him as my wide receiver 53. I could not put him any higher just based on how he's been performing the last 3 weeks. But I kind of feel like this should be a good bounce back game for the Maryland passing game in general. Vegas is only calling on Maryland to score 24 and a half points. I would like to see a little bit more there. And if UCLA's offense keeps playing like they are, this Maryland offense might be in a game script where they're having to play from behind, they're having to throw more. And I like that game script setup that you could see to go along with these advanced stats. We've got three pretty good advanced stats for this matchup. The fantasy matchup grade is a B minus. UCLA gives up 1.83 passing touchdowns per game, and they give up 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Like I said, those are all really good. And one really good thing for this matchup is that UCLA gives up touchdowns 79.2% of the time in the red zone. There's all green on the board with these advanced stats that I'm looking at with Knotts here. So I am kind of saying I think Knotts is a guy, maybe he's your last wide receiver in your lineup, or maybe he's a flex guy. I don't know how good he can do this week, but I definitely think this should be a bounce back game for him. So I'm going to say Shalik Knotts, Maryland, start him. Take a sip of water before we jump to the tight ends. Man, Bullfrog is being nasty today. I am going to start off with a fantasy tight end here that everyone is just waiting to get back to being productive, but I just don't see it. That is Jeremiah Franklin, Boston College. I said I was going to circle back to this game, guys. Taking on UConn here. Now, Boston College is being called on to score 29.5 points in this game. And I put Franklin as my tight end 41 for this week. The biggest thing that I have right now, any Boston College player that's in the passing game, is that this passing game is struggling bad. I just want to see Lonergan actually play well again, because if he plays well, like that trickles down to all the pass catchers. And right now, like it's just been so bad that I think every guy needs to be left on the bench until you see them actually do it again. And then you need to hope that the next week is a good matchup. But right now, like not everything's terrible for this matchup for Boston College. So I'm going to kind of make it quick, but fantasy matchup grade is a B. The red zone touchdown conversion rate is 60%. Those are all kind of good stuff. But UConn gives up one passing touchdown per game, which is kind of bad, and they give up 6.7 yards per pass attempt. That's average. I just think the biggest factor here is Lonergan's poor quarterback play. It is holding back this passing game. Until we see him do it, I think everyone, including Jeremiah Franklin from this Boston College passing game, needs to be a sit-em. Second tight end I'm going to go over here is Eli Raridan from USC. This is another matchup that we talked about earlier in the quarterback section when I talked about CJ Carr. As I mentioned before, I like this matchup for the Notre Dame passing game going up against USC. Once again, I'm not going to go over each and every advanced stat, but I will just say again, this is an A fantasy matchup grade here, guys. And in tough games, those are typically where you see the tight end leaned on more. Raridan had a great performance last week, and Carr's distributing the ball around pretty well to all sorts of guys. But I think Raridan can keep it going here. I can see him at least hitting double-digit fantasy points. I'm not going to say he's going to hit 15, 18 points, but I think this is a good one. If you have him, go ahead and throw him in there. Eli Raridan, Notre Dame, start him. And following up on this one, I talked about him last week. I'm going to bring him up again. I've been bringing him up in the waiver wire target articles, but a guy who I think is going to be a hot name for the remainder of the season is Brock Lane, Utah State. He is taking on San Jose State. Vegas is calling on Utah State to score 35 points. I really like that. I have Brock Lane as my number 2 tight end this week. And I think I left that out. For those of you listening on Substack, excuse me, on Spotify, Eli Raridan from Notre Dame, I had him ranked my tight end number 10. Switching back over to Brock Lane, who I have as my tight end 2 this week. Um, there's a number of key guys in the San Jose State offense that are questionable this week. Assuming they play, I think San Jose State is going to score points. It's going to force Utah State to have to throw to keep up. That's going to help Brock Lane here. This is an A fantasy matchup grade, which is really good. And another thing which is really good in this matchup is that San Jose State is giving up 8.7 yards per pass attempt. The other things are just average here for Lane. San Jose State giving up 1.67 passing touchdowns per game, and they give up touchdowns in the red zone 56% of the time. Lane has a hot hand. I'm going to take another sip of water. Lane has a hot hand the last 2 weeks since he came back and he's fully healthy. I'm really saying, like, ride this Brock Lane train. All right, guys. I think, and literally, I think he's a starter like every week for the rest of the season, guys. If he's sitting out there right now and you can grab him for free, go do it. I think he's going to be one of the most valuable tight ends in the back half of this season. So Brock Lane, Utah State, big time, start him. All right, guys. This has been, excuse me, this has been my selections here on YouTube, on Spotify for the Let Purple Rain podcast. LetPurpleRain.com is going to be the exclusive home where I answer your submitted questions and I help you create your best lineups. As I said before, follow me on X or join the discussion in Substack. That's where I put out the announcements every week to get your questions. I want to help make sure I can get you the best fantasy lineup possible. Thank you so much for tuning in here. And you can find a link to letpurplerain.com to the article where you can watch the submitted questions. The link is in the description below. You've been listening to Start Em, Sit Em. Please follow on Spotify and YouTube. Thanks for joining the Let Purple Rain podcast. Your CFF Rain starts here.